All right, fellas, welcome to Gamepack podcast number 3. This time around, we have a very special guest, the original God of War creator, David Jaffe. David, how you doing, man?
Saturday morning, not too shabby, man. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. It's glad to have you here, and of course, I'm accompanied by Kurt, our one of our content creators and writers and editors. How you doing, Kurt?
I'm good. I'm pretty good.
Pretty good, awesome, dude. And Jay, of course, our Nintendo writer. What's up, Jay?
Hello.
And Devin, our PlayStation writer.
Hello.
All right, David. So let's talk a little bit about the game prices. So you've been in the space for a while, in the industry AAA space for a while, and games went from, I think in the PS2 days, was it what, $50 at the time?
I don't even remember. I mean, I hear a lot of people go back to the Super Nintendo days and talk about, at least in America, they're like, dude, I was paying $79 for, Stunt Racer FX or whatever with, I know they've always, depending on where you buy and where you live in the country, they kind of vacillated from like $49 up to $79. But I think PS2 might have been $49.99, but I really don't remember anymore.
Right. Yeah, I think it was $49.99. And then I remember PS3 and 360 era was definitely $60, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And then, of course, now with the PS5, Sony specifically is raising, price by $10 on their, AAA exclusives like, what is that game called that's coming out in April? I forget.
Well, Horizon is going to have it, I'm sure, and
Horizon's gonna have it, and
Ratchet and Clank as well.
Ratchet and Clank.
Ratchet 70, okay, yeah. So, I mean, not all their games, to be fair, but a lot of them, like you said, the big AAA ones, they're saying they're going to be 70. 2K looks like they're going that route. Ubisoft looks like they're going that route.
Right. Oh, Returnal is also going to be 70. It was confirmed.
Returnal is 70? That's surprising,
Yes.
But okay.
Yeah, it is surprising because it's an arcade game. Housemarque is a great developer, man. Don't get me wrong. But
it looks great. Looks great.
Yeah, but I don't know if I want to pay that kind of money, and I don't know if Sony is getting. I don't want to say the word. I don't want to use the word arrogance. They've been there before. They have all this success, and that's great. I'm happy for them. But at the same time, I also understand that the game prices are going up in terms of development. Budgets are just getting crazy, dude. I think I was reading somewhere that back in the day, Grand Theft Auto was made by 25 people. Grand Theft Auto 3 specifically in 2001, and was a lot cheaper to make.
Oh my God, dude! You have no idea. I mean, let's put it this way: we made the first Twisted Metal for $850,000.
Right.
The last Twisted Metal, which was in 2012, cost about $21 million. And we made Twisted Metal Black, which was in development at the same time as Grand Theft Auto, for about that same team size. That game was probably $8 million, if I remember correctly. So. And now there are a number of AAA games that first-party games are over 200 million in a lot of cases. So yeah, I mean that metric has changed across the board. Has had a number of effects on everything from production to politics within the industry. It's absolutely insane,
Right.
But that's where we knew we were going, because that's what everybody wanted. We want more and more and more success and more mainstream, and it's gonna be a really interesting thing to watch, though, because it's tracking with movies in so many ways, but games have a very big problem compared to movies, which is there is a relatively low ceiling of audience when it comes to the kind of games that are being created for those budgets. There's a really strange relationship going on. Like if you look at what just happened this last week with Roblox, which sold for not sold, but they launched their IP and now they're valued at I don't know how many billions, but it's more than these AAA video game companies like what Sony makes and stuff, or the companies like Ubisoft, more valuable.
Right. I think I was reading it was around 30 billion.
Yeah, and those games cost very little to make. They have low ceilings, which means they have all kinds of audience members that are able to come in and partake. And then you compare that to The Last of Us Part 2, which I'm playing now for the first time, and I adore it. I love it. I'm surprised because I didn't like the first one at all. but I love the second one. But this is an over 200, reportedly over $200 million video game.
Right.
And the number of people who are going to be able to really play it and enjoy it compared to something like a Roblox or a Minecraft or a even to some extent a Call of Duty multiplayer is teeny tiny insignificant, because you've got crafting, you've got difficult enemies, you've got stealth, you've got navigation. And so it's really weird that the money is going into these games more and more and more that are ultimately, there's a finite amount of people who are going to engage with that stuff. So it's going to be real fascinating to watch where this goes.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And the risk is just too high, like to develop something new unless you're like an indie developer. But even then, indie games cost money too.
Well, indie games are the bright spot to me in terms of game design, because that at least is where here's what is really cool to me about this is that in the last week, besides the Roblox story, there was a great, NPD came out for February where hardware is up, games are up, everyone's buying games. It's great, regardless of how big of the title is or how big in scope the title is. But last week they reported that, let's see, it was Loop Hero, which is this crazy tiny indie game, has sold 500,000 copies in like 5 days. Little Nightmares 2 has already sold 1 million copies, which is it's a side-scrolling, very weird in a wonderful way, artistic adventure game. And then is it Valheim has sold now 6 million copies in a handful of weeks, and all of these totally run against the herd of big production. Lots of money to create. One of those, Valheim, is early access, right? And so there is also, on the flip side, there is a clear appetite in embracing on the part of gamers, a lot of gamers, the willingness to try things that don't look like The Last of Us Part 2. They don't need to look that way for what's looking like millions of gamers to engage with this stuff. So, I mean, this industry's always been interesting. Every year there's something new, but this is the hardest time I've ever been in the industry. Well, I'm not really in it anymore, but around the industry, to read the tea leaves. It's like, I don't know what is happening out there. So, and how much of it is only tied to the pandemic, and how much of it is going to sustain once everybody gets healthy again. I have no idea. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's a very interesting time right now, and with the new console launches right now and all that stuff, all the crazy delays, people are waiting for the next big thing, and all these studio purchases. It's definitely an exciting time. It's also concerning, I would say as well. In different ways, people are like, "Oh, where's gaming going? Is subscription services the next big thing?" You look at something like Game Pass, or you look at PS Now. What's going on with the VR market, this and that, and what's going on over there, what's going on over here. I think it's all over the place right now. So, are there any particular studios that you're really, really keeping your eye on?
I mean, not for, I mean, I'm fans of some studios. I mean, I'm not, of course I'll look at what is happening within Sony first party, not just because I know those people and I like those people, but certainly Naughty Dog and Sony Santa Monica represent kind of the vanguard of just great, the highest level of development in terms of production value and whatnot. So that's always fun to watch. But I love Way Forward, which is this amazing developer that's never really broken big, but they do a lot of side-scrolling and kind of almost classic Nintendo games with really nice production value. It's stuff. I like that. I like the guys who do the SteamWorld Heist games or the SteamWorld Dig games. I have just become aware of a company called Movie Games, and these guys are a publisher. But they've put out 2 games in the horror genre recently. One is called The Beast Within, and one is called Lust from Beyond, which, believe it or not, is a kind of adult-only X-rated horror game. And it's on Steam, and I was like, there was a demo, and I played the demo because I'm like, oh, this will be fun to play on my stream. It looks crazy. And both of those games, Lust from Beyond and Beast Within, are there's something really worth watching with that publisher, because I know they call themselves movie games. I have an interview hopefully coming up soon with the director of Lust from Beyond, but they really do seem to be better written than most horror games. Like there's something about the beats within the stories and what they ask you to do as a gamer and the pace of those games, where it feels like whoever is guiding that particular publisher genuinely understands, or at least has a better handle on interactive storytelling versus just straight up storytelling than what you might find, in like Resident Evil 2 remake, which I adored. But that feels more like a game, and the movie games do kind of feel a little bit more like you're living an interesting story. So, I'm always looking at stuff like that. I tend to find developers that are doing more interesting things more engaging to my brain versus just big production value developers, which are great and impressive. But I don't really play games for the production value. I play them for the gameplay.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was gonna ask you, do you think a modern day Twisted Metal would survive in today's climate? Have you ever thought of like, or hoped that someone would try to make a spiritual successor to that on modern hardware?
I think at this point, it's a question of, when you say Twisted Metal, it means a number of different things. I think the intellectual property of Twisted Metal is still very valid and still appealing. I don't necessarily think the best way to exploit it is straight up, let's make a $60 arena-based car combat game. I think you could potentially do that for free to play, kind of like Rocket League did, and see, put your best foot forward in that specific type of game and see where the chips fall. But there is a TV series coming out from Sony PlayStation Productions, from some of the guys who worked on Deadpool and worked on the Karate Kid series, the Cobra Kai series. And I've talked to those guys, and they've pitched me what the show is and stuff. And, I think exploring the intellectual property is of great value, whether it's in a show or a movie or a graphic novel or a different genre of game. I think the problem with Twisted Metal is it was only ever, for the most part, a big hit in America. And there were diminishing returns after we got past 4. So even the best reviewed one, which was like Black, never did as well as the earlier ones. And I think there's just, if the real challenge is, if you're going to spend the money to make it more than just arena-based car combat, which is it's a very low ceiling on in terms of audience interest, you have a problem, because the intellectual property is depending on how you look at it and which version you build off of, is vile, and it's violent, and it's R-rated, and it's dark. And the idea of Sony saying, okay, here's $220 million, go make an open world GTA meets Twisted Metal, and do it with this theme that historically has only really connected in America, and then make it like a hard M. I wonder what their appetite would be for that. I understand that The Last of Us is a very dark game, but it's also still a very, it's dark, but the darkness is the enemy, and so you push against it. And Twisted Metal, it asks you to revel in the darkness and enjoy the darkness. And I love that. I'd love for Sony to say, here's $200 million, go make the darkest thing you could think of. But I have a hard time thinking that they would pull the trigger on that.
Right. Yeah. That's definitely true. So when did you guys start making the original God of War? Was it like 2003? Like the first game came out in 2005, right?
Yeah, so I finished Twisted Metal Black in 2001, and then I jumped on. I had helped set up Sony Santa Monica Studios. I was one of the founding members of like 4 of us, and then they were doing a game called Kinetica. After Black finished up, I knew I would be taking over as the director that Kinetica team to work on whatever was next. And so I helped them finish Kinetica at a design level for about 4 months. And then all during that time, and about 6 months after, I was noodling with about 3 different ideas. And God of War, which was called Dark Odyssey at the time, was one of them. And so we actually decided we are going to make this game, Dark Odyssey. I want to say it was around holiday season 2001. And so then once we got back in 2002, we worked up until probably March of 2005 to get the first one done. So it was about 3 years starting production in 2002, but conceptualizing and pre-production was starting late 2001.
Damn, it's pretty early. So that was like what, a 3-4 year development cycle then, right?
Development was 3 years. Conception and pre-production added another maybe 6 months to it.
Right, right.
But I mean, we were building. That was the idea. Shannon and I were both like, our goal is let's build a new IP, let's build a franchise. And I mean, you everybody wants that. It's not like it's a very clever goal, but that was sort of, we knew that we were building a universe and characters. I mean, everything was from scratch. It wasn't like, let's make a World War II shooter. And a lot of the heavy lifting tragically had already been done for us because there actually was a war, and it's like it was in the real world, and it was more about replicating something that either was real or that someone else had already come along and created, and we were playing in their playground. We had to make the game that took place in the playground that we had to create before we could make the game. And so, there was a lot of double duty going on, not just making a game, but, building a world.
Yeah, I can imagine that's definitely a lot of work. You're like, when you do something completely brand new and you don't really know how people are going to react to it and if it's going to work and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was I will chalk it up, hopefully my deathbed is very far from today, but I will chalk it up to one of the great experiences of my life. I mean, I don't want to do it again, but it was really, what a great. There's a filmmaker. I mean, this phrase comes to mind. I don't want to bore your audience, but I want to tell you the quick story. There's a filmmaker, he's dead now, called Eddie Dimitrix. He used to teach filmmaking at USC, and he wrote a book, and in the book there was a quote. Pretty sure it was Eddie Dimitrix who said it, but he basically says, when you're directing movies, there's going to be a window in your career when you're hot, and it may ebb and flow, but ultimately you'll be able to look back at your career and say, this was the window in which you got to run with the ball, kind of like basically meaning you're, as a football analogy. And he's like, there will come a time where the chances to run with that ball are less and less and less until it just becomes, that's not what you do anymore. He says, just when you're running with the ball, never fail to appreciate how much fun it is to run with the ball. And so for me, I look back at that time and I'm just like, whatever comes next for me, whatever my career, whatever my life looks like, that was a moment in time where I got to, work with this incredibly talented group of people. And I got all these amazing resources of a huge company, meaning Sony. And I got to make something with this team that really was something that was, a dream from being a kid. And so it was a lot of work, and I never want to do it again, but it was a lot of work, but it was very fulfilling, and I'm glad to have had the experience.
Yeah, that does sound really fascinating for sure. I can imagine how knowing that you've created something special that a lot of people really love. And I mean, God of War, I would say arguably right now is one of the most, if not the most anticipated game right now. I mean, that's just every time there's a God of War article, people are like, oh my god, what's going on? Is this game coming out this year? Is it coming out? People are just going crazy, like, what's the next thing? How's it gonna look like?
A lot of that, or all of that, really more at this point, which is Sony Santa Monica and Corey's doing. But I love the fact that certainly I was there to lay the foundations with a great team of
Right.
what that is. But yeah, I mean, it's it's interesting because, at least to me, it's interesting. A lot of people online will come at me, and I don't know. I guess because I'm not really interested in. I'm more interested in honesty than making friends when it comes to what I talk about online. So I'll rub people the wrong way, and they'll come at me and they'll think they're insulting me because they'll be like, oh, you're all salty, or you're all upset because, or you're jealous because the new God of War is doing so well and whatnot. Even though I did a review of the new God of War and I adore it, I think it's phenomenal. And it's interesting because to me, it really is it's like the older I get and the further I get away from it, and the more I watch it succeeding without me, it's actually kind of, it's really nice. It's nice to know I don't have to do any of the work anymore, but my sort of legacy of what I got to do to build that engine, that's still out there in the world, and it reminds me of when I was at Comic-Con many years ago. I forget the guy's name, which maybe that's telling, but I don't really follow Batman all that much. I don't care too much for Batman. And the guy who created the Joker was there, and he was drawing images for fans of the original Joker he had designed and signing. And he was an old dude, like 80 something. And I remember looking at what he was drawing, and it was so different than the Joker that was in vogue at the time, which I think was the Heath Ledger Joker. But it was so cool to look at that and go, yeah, all this stuff changes and ebbs and flows and evolves and devolves and whatnot. But ultimately, the Joker, who's on screen right now or had been on screen recently with Christian Bale, that DNA is because this guy and his artist or whoever he worked with created that, back in the 30s, so it was very similar feeling. It's like Kratos can change and adjust and blah, 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 blah. But ultimately, I'm one of his fucking dads, and that never goes away. And that's really cool, man. I love that.
Yeah, that makes sense for sure. Do you guys have any questions in regards to Dave's experience with God of War?
I do, yeah, if I may interject for a quick second here.
Sure.
So you were just saying there, Jaffe, that watching God of War succeed while you were on the sideline, I'm curious, how did it feel to see when he started going a bit downhill with the Ascension and the multiplayer and everything?
Well, first off, I thought the multiplayer was really good. It was good, not just, I thought it was fun. I mean, it wasn't my kind of game necessarily, but boy, I'll tell you, to do melee combat in 3D space over the internet is not an easy thing. So I was impressed by it. I honestly haven't played Ascension. The last one I played that wasn't the new God of War was God of War 3, which I really, really enjoyed. But I mean, I understood why it was going downhill. I understood why it was less and less interesting, because you always have to, sweeten up the drink. You've always got to add a little more salt after you get kind of used to what it is. And Ascension, here's what I think actually happened. So I'm stubborn, Corey is stubborn, and he did too. And then Stig, I don't know how stubborn Stig is, but Stig was at a time where 1 and 2 had done really well, and 3 was going to be the first God of War on PlayStation 3. And so clearly there wasn't a lot of people to fight. I think by the time 4 rolls around, especially because 3 was critically loved, but I don't think it delivered financially or sales-wise. I know it was a big hit, but it wasn't as big as I think they wanted. And that wasn't the game's fault. That was because, we were right at the apex of GameStop going, hey, would you like the new God of War for $4 less? It's a used copy. And so, the number of developers that were losing sales, significant sales, unless you were making a multiplayer game, to use sales that we weren't getting a cut of, which was totally GameStop's right. Mm-hmm. But, look where they are now. I mean, all it really did was accelerate publishers to think about and develop digital distribution faster. But anyway, so Ascension comes along, and God of War 3 had not ruled the roost as much financially as they wanted. And I think Todd Pappy, who's one of the best designers I've ever worked with, who directed that game, and now I think he's working on the Chris Roberts Star Squadron or Star Soldier, whatever that thing is, the multi-billion-dollar, game that is crowdfunded, not billion, but tons of millions. I don't know if Todd at the time, Todd Pappy, was, as it was his first gig directing, he might have been, I wasn't there, Corey wasn't there anymore, Stig wasn't there anymore. And I don't know if he knew, if he had enough people there at the time to tell him, hey, you can fight. It's okay to fight against management. It's okay to be the bad guy when you're directing a game, because your job is to ask for all kinds of things that no one wants to give you, because if you're doing your job right, you're making people uncomfortable because you're pushing everybody to not just push the rock up the hill, but to make that rock really freaking cool. And it's hard. And I get the sense with Ascension, Todd was more like, I'm trying to be, because he's such a good dude, I'm trying to be a good guy. I'm trying to be a nice guy that I am. And I also have this job to do. And maybe in that case, Todd just didn't give himself enough freedom, or the studio didn't give him enough freedom to really go, I want to make something really cool. And it was more like, and I haven't played it, I hear it's good, but I know it didn't do that well, comparatively speaking. But I want to do something really cool versus like, I just want to, you know, I want to do that, but I don't want to rock the boat too much. Now that's me, you know, Monday morning quarterbacking. I don't know if that's what happened, but that's kind of what it feels like what happened. So how did I feel? I was so disengaged from it by that point. I had left God of War, you know, a while ago. So I didn't really, it's not that I didn't care. I wasn't apathetic, but it just wasn't on my radar. I was like, oh yeah, no, I told them they should have freshened it up. Okay. Back to my shit. You know, it wasn't on my mind.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Well, yeah. Devin, you have any questions?
Yeah, I saw that you recently read the God of War comic book that kind of fills in the gap between 3 and 18. I mean, the 2018 version.
Correct.
Yeah. What did you think of it? Did you like the how they filled in that gap?
Well, I mean, it's only issue 1. I don't know if it's a, you know, if it's a limited series. I get the sense it's a limited series. Dark Horse usually does limited series. I don't know how many more issues are to come. Overall, there were some really neat ideas in it. The one that I thought was, you know, what's really fun also, by the way, I'll get back to your question, but I want to tangent for a moment. What's really fun is when other people outside of the God of War universe come in and bring their own stuff. I remember specifically an Oscar-nominated writer. They paid this guy $1 million, David Self, who had written at the time, his Oscar-nominated role was called 13 Days, which was about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And they hired him to write the very first version of the God of War movie that, of course, never got made. And I read the script, and it was good and all, but there was a point in the movie, if you remember the first God of War, there's this place called the Pandora's Temple, which is this giant temple on the back of a Titan crawling through the desert. And the idea was the guy who built the temple died inside building it, but he never stopped. He spent his entire life thinking it was not complete. And that was sort of our story. And what he did with it was really interesting. Somehow he had given this designer of the temple a magic. I don't know if the character had magic or he had a magic item like a quill or something. But as he was designing the blueprints, the temple was building itself in real time. So in the movie, what would have been happening, Kratos would have been going through Pandora's temple, and he wouldn't have only had to deal with the challenges, the sort of Indiana Jones booby traps and monsters and whatnot, but the literal temple, based on the mood and the creative spirit that was hitting the designer at any given moment, was changing around him in real time, right? I thought that was the coolest thing, right? So kind of similarly, when you read the comic book, there's an idea that I'm like, oh, I wish that would have been my idea. That's so cool, which is Kratos has, I don't even remember at this point. I think they're the Blades of Chaos, but I know he has the Blades of Athena. He's got all these different blades at this point. It's all confusing to me. But I think whatever blades he has at the end of God of War 3, he somehow in the comic, because I remember them being chained to his wrist, but he somehow is able to take them off. And he's throwing them away. And that's sort of the whole point of the story at this point. He's like, I can't kill myself. I'm going to be cursed forever, but at least I can get rid of these things that remind me of my awful past, blah, blah, blah. So he takes them and he throws them away, and they stay gone, and he goes to bed. But every time he wakes up, it's almost like a Twilight Zone. They're back, right? So he can throw them into the ocean, and he can ride his horse 100 miles away and go to sleep in a cave. But when he wakes up the next day, they're the Blades of Chaos waiting for him. He can never be away from them, is the idea. And so he makes this decision. He says, okay, I'm just not going to sleep. I'm going to just stay awake. I will not succumb. I'm freaking Kratos. Morpheus, the master of dreams, is not going to stop me. I will not deal with this anymore, these blades. And he starts having these weird loopy hallucinations, and he doesn't sleep for days, and he winds up in Egypt, and animals start talking to him and talking about his prophecy and what he'll do in Egypt. And so there's all of this really cool storytelling happening in the comic, but it's like the ideas are good, but the read is not good. The read is really fast. It's like a $5 comic, or I think it's like a $4.99 or a $3.99 comic. It's 22 pages. There's not a lot of dialogue, not a lot of words. It's just a lot of images of him kind of wandering around through the world. And it reads like, I read the whole thing in 6 minutes. It almost reads like a pamphlet that you would get at E3, like, hey, come to play God of War 3 at E3 and get the free Dark Horse comic book. It almost feels like a promotional piece versus an actual substantial comic book, So I have problems with it, and the art is all over the place. Sometimes they draw Kratos beautifully, and other times you're like, oh, that doesn't look very good. But so it's very spotty, but the story they're telling, I think, is actually quite cool. I'm gonna wait and see how they compile it. Like if it's 8 issues, I'm like, okay, I'll wait for the 8 issues to come out, then I'll buy the trade paperback. But I have no intention of spending another $4 to read 22 pages in 6 minutes when it drops next month.
Right.
That's a long answer to your question of what did I think of the comic. I bet I could have just gone like, it's pretty good. It's a pretty good comic.
Yeah, but what kind of content would that be?
What's that?
Well, what kind of content would that be? We need the tangents from you.
That's all I got, baby. That's all I got. This is the value of early on. I just go places. We'll see where it takes us.
In regards to God of War, did you guys always knew that you wanted to make a Greek mythology game, or was that like, what other mythologies did you guys experiment with?
That was built into the initial pitch. It was I wanted to do Clash the Titans meets Gladiator, or my pitch at the time was and a lot of people don't know who this is anymore, so I changed the writing, but it was originally said, what if Paul Verhoeven, who's a movie director, directed Clash the Titans? And Paul Verhoeven, if you don't know, does very kind of violent, adult, but really fun movies. He did Starship Troopers. He did RoboCop. He did a couple. He did Total Recall. Right. Yeah. I mean, and so it was sort of that Heavy Metal Magazine vibe. But a lot of people are like, who's Paul Verhoeven? So I changed it to Ridley Scott, who had just had the big hit with Gladiator, and people understood it more. But yeah, I grew up loving Clash of the Titans, the original. I grew up loving Harryhausen. I grew up loving just Greek mythology in general. And so I knew I wanted to do something with the monsters and the cool Indiana Jones temples and architecture and all of that stuff. So that was always the very beginning idea, was a Greek mythology action adventure game, inspired but sort of modernized for the audiences of today, but inspired by the Harryhausen kind of fantastical presentation of Greek myths.
Yeah, that's awesome, dude, because I was always fascinated by Greek mythology. Ever since I saw the Hercules Disney cartoon, dude, I was, the Hydras, the Centaurs, like all that kind of stuff was like, as a kid, you were like, is that real? Does that actually exist? And so, you always like believed like these silly things, and then you go to school, you read like mythology books and whatnot, and that was like what people believed back then.
Well, there's a whole different conversation, but let me just say 2 things about that. One is, if you look at the God of War design document, the original, and I sometimes give that away on my stream to contest winners. I have copies of it that I give out. It's like a 25-page, the first thing I ever wrote for it when it was called Dark Odyssey. And at the back of it, we were debating, like, what is the art style? And I had a couple of images suggesting, we could go photoreal, we could go hyperreal. And then I have images from Disney's Hercules. And I'm kind of like, there is an option that we could make this much more, Zelda cell shaded, and it would still be violent, but let's make it cartoony. And so it wasn't given serious thought, but that was one of the considerations, which is, let's take visual inspiration, from Disney's Hercules. But yeah, I mean, Greek mythology is awesome. And then halfway through the first one, I had been thinking about where he could go next. And then when Corey came on, we started talking seriously about, the big story we wanted to tell, which dealt with Norse and Egyptian, and ultimately dealt with Jesus and the wise men and the rise of today's gods and what would happen to Kratos, in 2020 and all that stuff. It wasn't, I wouldn't say it was planned out in the way that we knew exactly where it was going to go, but we had very big, bright breadcrumbs at the end of midpoint God of War 2, where we're like, this is the master story that we're trying to tell. And Corey and I didn't agree on everything, and then I left, and then Corey left, and sort of Stig came and took it his own route. And so I don't know if what Corey's doing right now with God of War is trying to get that train back on those particular tracks, or if he's like, yeah, all that was great, Jaffe, but all I really took was the Norse mythology. I'm telling a totally different story now. I don't care.
Right.
It's his baby now, but that's sort of how we did it, though.
So the God of War 2018, you never wanted? Did you ever want Kratos to go to to the north or whatever, the Vikings?
Yeah, I mean, again, the story, I designed. Let's put it this way: I designed God of War 3 for about 3 days, and then I was like, yeah, I'm leaving. I got to leave Sony. I got to go start my own company. And so I was about more like 3 or 4 weeks. But in that time, I was going to pick up God of War 2 right where it left off, and it was going to be this big thing with Zeus, and it was going to be, you can see this online if you want to link your audience to it. There's a whole God of War Directors Live stage show that me and Corey and Stig and Rue and Dana did, where we talked about a lot of things, including this, where I went into kind of excruciating detail. But the gist was, we were going to build up the first 20 minutes of God of War 3 like this whole game is about prepping to fight Zeus, because he is the big bad. And Kratos finally in the first 20 minutes meets Zeus and sees Zeus, and he's so powerful and so angry that it's almost like Snoke in Last Jedi. He just kills him. In the first 20 minutes of the game, Zeus is dead. And it's like, oh, well, I thought that was going to be this game. And the whole thing that spins us from Greek myths into Norse, into Egypt, into Native American, all of that stuff was going to be the results of Zeus dying and the power vacuum that existed, because now you had this entire pantheon of gods who didn't know who to, go to for leadership. And you had the Greek people going, what do we do now? And that spun us off ultimately into the rise of Jesus Christ and Muhammad and
Right.
The Old Testament, and then that ultimately leads to Kratos being the Grim Reaper in modern times, which sort of he melts down the blades of chaos into the scythe, and he's like, you know what? I'm never getting over this. I am basically death. That's what I do. That's what I do well. That's what I know, and I am now the Grim Reaper. So when death comes for you, that's your boy Kratos knocking to the door.
That's
Right.
amazing.
That is pretty cool, actually.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's very good. Wow.
So that's where we were going with it. I have no idea where it's going now. It may still be that. I don't know.
Right. Let me ask you this: how soon did you find out about God of War 2018? Did they call you privately or something, or did you guys had a meeting or any did they ask you for any ideas or any resource material before they started working on 2018, or was that their own thing?
There's a story that people bring up to me, and I don't know if it's just I know Shannon, who produced it and ran the studio. I adore her. She's one of my favorite people in the industry, but I don't know if she was just spinning, or if it was misreported. But I was never called. There's a story that goes around that says, oh, we called Jaffe, or we were going to call Jaffe, but he was busy with Calling All Cars or Eat, Sleep, Play, or wherever I was at the time, or Twisted Metal. And I'm like, yeah, no, that never happened. They might have thought about it, but they never did it. And then Shannon and I for a while had a falling out, and I couldn't stand her. I just was so angry at this person. And during that time, we didn't talk, and I was focused on my own stuff. And we made amends at, I think it was the very first PlayStation experience back in 2000X. I don't know when that was, 2012 or 13 or whatever, in Vegas. And they had not announced God of War at that point. But, I knew it made sense they were making one, and I was pretty sure I remember they were making it. And we went out to dinner that night, and we made up and everything. And in that, we started talking about what they were doing, what I was doing. And it was like, yeah, okay. I knew they were making it. And that's when she kind of, gave me of course we're making it, and gave me some details. But no, I was never consulted on it or anything like that. No. And I I didn't need to be. I mean, it's my take on God of War is very different. And there is a comfortable awareness that has settled over me maybe in the last couple of years that at least with that kind of game, the train has left the station for me with that kind of game. Maybe all games, but certainly that kind of game. I could not do what Corey does at this point. I could not do what Neil Druckmann does at this point. I had a time for those kinds of games where I really connected with the zeitgeist, both conceptually and also mechanically in terms of gameplay. There's a comfort in that realization because I played God of War 2018 and it's so, again, it's not the kind of game I would make, but it's so good and so well written, and so thoughtful. I don't mean like it's soft and thoughtful, although it can be at parts, but it's so well thought out. And the same thing applies to Last of Us Part 2, that's just not what I do. I am very comfortable. If at the end of the day, if somebody, and I don't even know if I'll keep making games, but if I kept making games and at the end of the day, Corey and Amy Hennig and Neil Druckmann were all kind of praised as, the Camerons, the Spielbergs, the Christopher Nolans of the industry. And someone said to me, I was more like the Lloyd Kaufmans who ran Troma, who does Toxic Avenger, or I was more like Roger Corman or the Cannon Group that just does crazy, stupid, schlocky fun. I'd be like, okay, I'm totally down with that. I have no problem with that. So there was a time when that mentality was the 4-course 5-star meal. And now it's moved on beyond my interest and abilities. And so I don't look at God of War 2018 as something that I'm like, I should have done that. I look at it and go, yeah, I could never do that. And if that's what gamers want, and it clearly is, this is working exactly as the system is designed. Now, if Sony ever called me and said, Jaffe, we would love for you to come back and do God of War 2.5D, God of War meets Castlevania, or God of War Metroidvania, I'd be like, okay, yes, I would love to do that, but I have no interest in doing a big third-person performance capture thing. It's just not what I want to do.
Right. Why did you decide to leave the gaming industry, man? When did you leave?
Well, I mean, it's not like there's a card that you give up. I mean, I could always go back in. But, I did Drawn to Death with the Bartlett Jones Supernatural Detective Agency, which was a company I had with Nick Conanellis in San Diego. Best company experience of my life. I mean, it was a wonderful group of people, very talented, just a great atmosphere that we worked in, great office building. But we put a game out that had a lot of heart in it that really was personal to me, and it just didn't connect. At best, it didn't connect with the vast majority of people, critics and gamers. At worst, people were so cruel and so mean and so off-put by it in their reviews and their comments, including, quote, professional reviewers. And they just didn't, not that it was their job. It's my job as the creator to have them get what I'm going for. But even that said, they didn't get what I was going for. And what I was going for, it was a lot of thought. It was a lot of care. It was a lot of love. And it was painful for that not to connect in that way. And so we were doing another game after that, and that ended up not going, which had nothing to do with us. That had to do with the company we were working with at the time. And we were like, we had a choice of we could kind of get out there and try to find some business and find a new partner to make games with, or we could kind of shut things down, take the money we have in the bank. Nick and I, one of the reasons the company was a good place to work is we were always honest with everybody about the dangers of the industry in terms of you never know what's going to happen. We spent money on, making people as paid as well as we could, and insurance and all that stuff. But we didn't care about, fancy offices and stuff like that. So we were able to save money, and we said, look, if we shut the company down, We have a bigger severance package. We can pay insurance for more months than we could have for employees who are no longer working. And so we said, let's just shut it down. And at that point, what I thought was going to happen is I thought I was going to be on the beach. I thought I was going to be being reflective, a lot of therapy. I thought I was going to cry a lot. I thought it was just going to be this cathartic 6-month experience that I was going to come out of and be like, now I know what I need to do in game. I've learned my lessons. I've adapted. I've emerged from the chrysalis, and now I am Jaffe Game Maker 2.0. But what ended up happening was I had this extended period that continued and still hasn't ended. But within maybe a month, I'm like, what I'm going to do while this is fiction better. I've always liked live streaming and editing and making YouTube. I've been making YouTube videos since like 2006 or 7. And I was just like, let me just play with that because that's a lot of fun for me. And I started doing a stream that I called the Jaffe stream about a month after I left Bartlett Jones when we shut it down. And, it was never a big hit or anything, but, within the first day or two, I was like, this is so much fun. And I hadn't had that much fun in a very long time with something I was working on. And, I remember a guy called into the show a couple months in and who directed Fast and the Furious Crossroads, which I know is like the most, it got a 35 Metacritic. People hate that game. Critics hated that game, but I loved that game. And I was just like, I want to talk to a guy who made a game I loved, but also who has had to deal with the slings and arrows of that kind of hate directed towards him and that kind of disrespect and that kind of cruelty. And like, how did you deal with it? I've had it. What was your, and it's just like everything from serious conversations like that to making stupid little puppets of Sean Layton, Jim Ryan, Phil Spencer, and they're singing, Huey Lewis songs. It's just fun. And so that's a very long way of saying, how did I leave the game business? I mean, I haven't left it. There are still little pings on my radar from time to time, but every time something comes up where I could maybe go back into games, I think about how much fun I'm having here compared to how much fun I was having there. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. I want to make a video today, or I want to stream today. And so I'll give you one last example. Tonight, for example, on our show, we do this thing, not all, but most Saturdays, called Popcorn and Pot. And then we show a double feature. The first features for members only that subscribe on the YouTube at various tiers. And we're going to eat edibles, and we're going to watch the Raising Kratos documentary about the making of God of War 2018. It's like a 2-hour documentary. And then afterwards, we open it up to everybody on Twitch who has a Twitch account and a Amazon account. We're going to watch Dread, right? Well, if somebody said to me, you can do your movie night tonight, which really doesn't bring in thousands of people or even hundreds of people, or you can sit down and you can design a brand new video game with a 80% chance that game will get funded. I would still rather do the movie night. So I just got to follow what my instincts are telling me. And my instincts right now are like, I'm having more fun doing this, so I should keep doing this.
That makes sense, yeah. Interesting. What if someone like came to you and said, hey, listen, I'm going to give you all the money you need. You can make anything that you want. Would you ever take it or no? Have you still had any ideas like for video games that you still kind of want to make before?
Look, let me be very clear. I mean, there is an absolute specific, not like it's like threading a needle, but there are a number of scenarios that would be very compelling to me to do some video game work. A lot of that, if not all of that, has to do with people. Right. If Shannon or Nick came to me and said, I want to do something with you, and we have Scott Rohde, Shuhei Yoshida, Alan Becker, who want to fund it and guide it at an executive level, or people like that, I would be very interested. There are game ideas. I have one up my YouTube channel called The Witch in the Walls, which is a horror game I want to do, which was inspired by, if you guys remember, in Texas, there were these terrible floods a couple years back, and the flooding was so bad that the cemeteries got flooded. And you can see pictures. This is not hyperbole. You can see pictures and videos online where the cemeteries got so flooded that the ground got so compromised that graves were literally rising up from where they had been buried 6 feet under, which is not really 6 feet under. That's a whole different story, which is fascinating, how deep a grave actually has to be. But anyway, they were rising up from the ground, and these were floating down Main Street, USA, coffins of dead people. And I was like, that is such a cool image, and that is such a cool starting point for a story. So there's this whole horror game I've written, or at least at a high level and designed at a high level, about that inciting incident and sort of what happens to this town that gets flooded and these graves rise and float through the streets and blah, blah, blah. So there's absolutely, I think the word is confluence, maybe is the word I'm looking for, but there is an aligning of planets and stars that can happen. And it's not incredibly rare. I could do Nick or Shannon. I could do Alan Becker or Scott Rhodey. There are some interchangeable parts, but ultimately those parts are people that I trust, not just to produce well and manage well, but to keep me in line and say, Jaffe, you are talented, you are creative, you're kind of an obnoxious force of nature, and we know how to work with you. But the idea of calling up Ubisoft and saying, let me just be really clear. If it gets to the point that I can't make a go of it financially with my investments and my savings and my current content creation, I would be stunned if I'm picking up the phone and calling my agent and saying, hey, can you just get me a senior designer job at Ubisoft? I think I would rather work at the grocery store. And I don't mean that like the grocery store is some step down. It's not. A job's a job. But I would rather have a job that doesn't tax me intellectually or emotionally, so I can just go home and leave it at the office and then get back to my content creation. I don't want to just be a designer anymore. It's like I've done that, right? So I would get back into it if the planets align, but I would not get back into it just to get back into it. There's no value in that.
Thanks so much, brother. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you guys very much for the time. See you guys soon.
Thank you, Jaffe.
Yeah, thanks.